Alright, hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at Cyberpunk performance across about 8 different Macs. This video took quite a while to make, so I'm sorry this video is a bit late. Fortunately, I didn't get early access to the game, so just had to work with what we got. So yeah, just want to quickly point out that this video will eventually be a HDR video. YouTube just takes a really long time to process HDR, so keep with it. But I think this video is definitely more enjoyable if you can view it on a HDR compatible display. So to start this video, I wanted to take a look at the game running on M1. Now we've got two M1 machines here, a 13-inch MacBook Pro with M1 and 8 gig of RAM, and a Mac Mini with 16 gig of RAM. So this game is not officially supported on any Mac with 8 gig of RAM, so you may have issues, but we found the game is actually somewhat playable even on my 8 gig M1 config. Do keep in mind, in macOS Toha, Metal Effects is currently not working, so we have to use FSR3. But we're testing for this Mac preset, and on these machines, it targets a mix of low and medium settings for this preset. The benchmark, we are seeing 29.5 FPS on my MacBook Pro with 8 gig of RAM, and on the Mac Mini, 29.98 FPS. What you're going to find in actual gameplay is that my MacBook Pro with 8 gig of RAM is facing some frame pacing issues, going from 28 to 29 to 30, while on my Mac Mini it did not have these issues. So yeah, it's really cool to see that this game is this playable on M1, even at 900p and a mix of low and medium. Obviously, FSR3 is probably running the game at something like an extremely low resolution, but it's still really cool to see that this 5-year-old hardware at this point is running this massive game. I also wanted to quickly test and see how the game would go at something like 720p low with FSR3 on performance. Do we get 60 FPS on these machines? No, obviously not. It is never 60 FPS. Well, I definitely don't recommend playing the game like this. It looks terrible with FSR3 at performance mode, which is running the game at an absurdly low resolution, and it's outputting that to 720p. I don't recommend it, but it's really cool to see that the game is hitting these results, I guess. But yeah, just a small look at Cyberpunk running on M1. I think it's really cool that it's actually this playable, to be honest. And call me crazy, but I really do think in the future an M series iPad port of Cyberpunk could work. Probably not on something like M1, but maybe on like an M3 and above iPad, like an M3 and above chipset. Obviously, you got to keep in mind the RAM limitations on iPad, only starting at 8 gig of RAM, and if it's working here like this, it could work on an M series iPad, obviously running at considerably lower settings. I don't know, it's just something to think about. Okay, moving on, we have my M3 iMac. Now this one has 24 gigabyte of RAM, so it is way over the 16 gigabyte minimum requirement. Anyway, we first tested the game at the preset of for this Mac, and on this machine it also targets a mix of low and medium settings respectively, and Metal Effects is on dynamic resolution scaling. So we can see this in the Metal HUD now, that it will switch to different resolutions in order to more easily maintain the 30 FPS target for which this machine is going for. And yeah, it does pretty well on the benchmark with 30 FPS locked, which is really, really cool. when in actual gameplay, the machine, the game looks, you know, in my opinion, fine here. Like low medium graphics at 1080p is perfectly acceptable, and the scaling input resolution isn't going down too low all the time, so it can look okay. You could argue that on this large 24-inch display, you may see some of the metal effects upscaling, but I had a perfectly fine time. Obviously, the 30 FPS target might not be ideal for some, but what we're seeing here is pretty much a consistent 30 frames, like 33.33 milliseconds, and I think that is freaking awesome for this M3 iMac. There is a bit of shader compilation going on here, but it's not being reflected in the frame interval, which is really cool to see. Like even when engaging in combat and big explosions are going on, it's still a flat line. This is definitely the way that you want to play the game here, because obviously for this Mac, preset has optimized this game specifically for this config in order to give you a stable 30 FPS. I think if you're going to go, oh, what if I want 60 FPS? Unfortunately, on this M3 iMac at least, you're not really going to get that at a decent resolution. So what's this? This is 900p with metal effects on performance, and we've got a preset of low. So this is using metal effects at 450p, and then that is going up to 900p. So the game doesn't look very good, but what you're getting here is 60 FPS on average. It's also worth noting that this display is 60 Hertz, so I have enabled VSync here, so it looks better if I just enable VSync. But what we're getting here is about 40 to 60 FPS. Yeah, so you could play the game like this. Personally, I don't recommend it. It doesn't look very good. If you're wanting closer to 60 FPS, I guess this is a way to go. Personally, would play at for this Mac preset because the game runs perfectly fine there. If you don't mind 60 FPS. I didn't look at the game too in depth here, but there is a lot to work with. You could obviously configure the settings here considerably. Like you could possibly enable like a 40 FPS target and play at higher video settings. I didn't do that, but that might be a good idea if you have an M3 Mac. Up next, we're going to take a look at my Mac Mini with M4 and 16 gigabyte of RAM. So I first did a benchmark for this Mac preset, which targets 30 FPS on this machine. I was kind of hoping that it might be able to do 60 at this, but that doesn't seem to be the case, but that's still okay. I would still call this a budget Mac, and for the performance you're getting here, this is actually not too bad. So on this Mac Mini, for this Mac preset is targeting mostly high settings, which is really good. The game looks freaking awesome. In the benchmark, we are getting 30 FPS on average. So here's some actual gameplay clips. What I am noticing here is that the frame pacing seems to be a little bit off. There is VSync enabled here, but we're not seeing like a consistent 33.33 milliseconds. It's like 32.83 milliseconds. I don't know why that is. I couldn't really fix it. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Like it's still providing 30 FPS. Yeah, the game looks pretty good here, and the scaling input resolution can go pretty low at times. Since it's using, metal effects temporal, I don't think it's that noticeable. It's pretty good, and this Mac Mini is incredibly cheap, so to be pulling off this type of performance on a base M4 chip, I think is freaking awesome. There's also not much shader compilation going on here, which is a very good sign of good optimization, I guess. I also did a benchmark for 1080p medium, which is to see how we'd go, and this provides an average FPS of 30, but do keep in mind it does provide a min FPS of 25.32 or whatever, and a max of 35.77. I also tested the game at a preset of medium with metal effects on balanced. Now, metal effects on balanced uses a scaling input resolution of 635p up to 1080p. And what we're getting here is an average FPS of 52.60. So not too bad. A min FPS of 44.25 and a max FPS of 64.85. I really would like the Mac to be able to be pushing like 60 FPS at these settings. Hopefully that could be possible in the future. This is an option for those of you who want a slightly higher FPS. I think what could be a good option is to cap the FPS at 40 for a more consistent experience. Also wanted to do a quick comparison here between Metal Effects and AMD FSR 3, both on balanced preset. And on this Mac, it looks to provide very similar results, which is pretty interesting to see. I'm very curious to see what the upcoming Metal Effects features in the upcoming Metal 4 version provide over this. That will be really, really cool to see. I don't really recommend you attempt ray tracing on this machine. I don't think base M4 is powerful enough. Hopefully base M5 in the future, but this is 1080p with the ray tracing preset of medium, and Metal Effects is on auto, so it's like 720p up to 1080p with Metal Effects, and we are seeing 18.75 FPS on average with a min of 15.98 and a max of 21.84. So I just don't think it's worth it on this machine, unfortunately. So what if you really want to be pushing like 60 FPS? Unfortunately, guys, it's quite difficult on M4. Like, this is a preset of low with Metal Effects on performance, and it is pushing close to 60 FPS, but it's still going below that. I also did a comparison between the game running on my M4 MacBook Air. And what you're going to find is if you are running this game on any MacBook Air, and I say this all the time, I don't recommend these machines for gaming in the slightest, because they have no fan, so they throttle hard, and the frame rate difference is quite considerable, even though they have the same chip. Alright, so I wanted to now take a look at frame generation. This is FSR 3.1 frame gen. Metal Effects frame interpolation will be coming later. But this is 1080p medium, and this is 1080p medium with FSR 3 frame gen, and we are seeing quite a massive boost in performance. And then this is 1080p medium with Metal Effects on balanced, and then 1080p medium with Metal Effects on balanced and FSR 3 frame gen, 80 FPS compared to 56. At the end of the day, frame generation works best if you have a minimum FPS of 60, and this Mac Mini struggles to pull that off at decent settings, so I don't really think it's worth using on this machine. I think frame generation is probably best used for the Pro and the Max and the Ultra chips. Even if it can provide you with 60 or 60 plus FPS, the experience just isn't good. I also wanted to do a comparison between the native macOS version and the crossover version. So this is crossover preview, and you can see what version it is. And this is 1080p medium. And the difference on this M4 Mac Mini isn't too staggering. So we're seeing in the benchmark 30 FPS for the native version and 27 for the crossover version, so like plus 3 FPS. So it's not a considerable difference here, but it's still definitely a benefit, because you know you're less often going below 30 FPS with the native version at 1080p medium, which is definitely ideal. What's also worth noting is the native version supports HDR, while under crossover you can't use HDR, and you can see that in this video. And also, one important thing that doesn't really get reflected in gameplay, at least I think, is shader compilation. It is so much worse in the crossover version compared to the native version. Now it's time to take a look at my 14-inch MacBook Pro with M4 Pro. For the preset of for this Mac, it's very good to see that it targets a frame rate of 60 and mostly high graphics. And it does provide you with an average FPS of 60 in the benchmark. I really do like playing this game at 60 frames. I find driving is considerably easier at 60 frames compared to 30, but it might just be being a bit nitpicky there. I really do like seeing the scaling input resolution changing in the HUD. It's just really cool to show us what this machine is doing in order to pull off 60 FPS. I think it's a pretty underappreciated little tool, but it's incredibly powerful. There is quite a bit of shader compilation going on. I don't think it's being reflected in the metal HUD. Even during this combat sequence with all the explosions and so forth, it's still able to pull off 60 FPS. I know some of you might be disappointed like that this is one of the latest and greatest Macs and it's 60 FPS only at 1080p, but I think it's personally completely acceptable. Like, it's fine. I then want to see what this machine could do at a preset of high and with VSync off, and it provides 50.44 FPS on average with a min of 41.99 and a max of 61.47. Ideally, I would really love this machine to be pulling off 60 FPS at the settings without using metal effects, but again, I might be asking for too much from this machine, but it's still okay. And again, maybe if you capped the frame rate at 40, you might get a better experience here. Because, you know, even during these shootout sequences that I've recorded here, it still doesn't really go below 40 FPS, and it's pretty good, I think. I then tried the game with metal effects balanced at high preset, and this bumps the FPS all the way up to 81.88, which is awesome. So this provides us 60 plus FPS, but we are running the game at a scaling input resolution of 635p up to 1080p. So a pretty low resolution with metal effects balanced. So I'm going to leave it up to personal opinion on whether or not if this is good or not. One thing I am noticing when running the game this way is there is considerably less shader compilation. On this Mac, I also did a quick comparison between AMD FSR3 balanced and Metal FX balanced, and there isn't really that much of a difference at all. Okay, so this machine can pull off ray tracing, and CD Projekt Red recommend using a preset of ray tracing medium, and then I put metal effects to quality, which targets a scaling input resolution of 1280 by 720. But we need to do this in order to get a playable FPS. So we're seeing an average FPS of 35.69 and a min FPS of 30.03 and a max FPS of 41.51. So ideally, I don't want to be getting below 30 FPS. Yeah, so we can't really pull off 60 FPS with ray tracing, obviously, but it goes without saying, in my opinion, the game looks pretty dope. There is quite a bit of shader compilation, but it's actually quite a lot less than I thought it would be. Okay, frame generation. It can work pretty well on this machine because it can pull off a base FPS of 60. You do, in many ways, need to use metal effects to benefit greatly with frame generation. This is 1080p high and we're getting below 60 FPS, but with metal effects balanced, it's like 90 or so. And then with frame generation, it's like 144 FPS. It's freaking awesome. So it looks considerably better in practice compared to like my M4, which was hitting below 60 FPS. It just doesn't feel like artificial. It just feels more natural. I'm not very good at explaining this technology compared to like Digital Foundry. It's really cool that this game has this because it can just provide you with like extra performance just by switching a toggle. But I think you, in a way, you need to know what you're doing in order to benefit from it well. Like this is just a very short demo of it. Now we're going to be comparing the native version against the crossover version. So the difference isn't too staggering. Again, we're seeing 50 FPS in the native version compared to 47 in the crossover version. So that's like plus 3 FPS, similar to the M4 Mac. So it's not too different, but at the end of the day, it does provide you better performance on paper, which is ideal. And again, the difference between shader compilation is staggering here. Like, it is just insane. I think some really smart people who have a better understanding of all the different features in the Metal HUD will have a better understanding of what's going on and how the native version is doing compared to the crossover one. I do got to give credit to Code Weavers for their optimization here. It is really, really amazing what they are able to do converting a DirectX 12 game into Metal. It's just, I say it all the time, but it's amazing what they are able to accomplish. Alrighty, so now we're going to be taking a look at my 14-inch MacBook Pro with M3 Max. Now, I do want to say something before we get into this. This machine throttles really hard for gaming in general, so it's probably not the best example of showing this game on an extremely high-end Mac, but it's simply all I can afford. So this is a preset of for this Mac, which targets mostly high and also 1080p and 60 FPS. Yeah, it gets really hot, which makes hitting 60 FPS quite difficult. But you probably won't have this issue if you're running it on a 16-inch MacBook Pro or a Mac Studio. So we're seeing an average FPS of 56.37. It's still fine, but just the frame interval is going all over the place, and the frame rate is going like between 57 and 60 FPS. I think for the average gamer, if you've playing this on this Mac, you're probably going to have an okay time. There's also quite a bit of shader compilation going on here as well. I don't know if that is adding to the inconsistent frame rate as well. I then tried a preset of high with metal effects on quality. And in the benchmark mode, this provides an average FPS of 63.23, but still with a min FPS of 51.32 and a max FPS of 83.39. It's just that at the end of the day, this machine gets really hot, which unfortunately just makes hitting 60 frames quite difficult. I also did a comparison between 1440p high with metal effects on quality and 1440p medium with metal effects on quality, and we're still not able to pull off 60 FPS. CD Projekt Red said that for M3 Max, if you want to try ray tracing, it's best to use a preset of ray tracing medium. And this is supposedly for a 60 FPS target at 1080p. I found this machine is unable to pull off 60 FPS at these settings, unfortunately. The game does look gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but I think if you want 60 FPS at these settings, it's more likely suited for the Mac Studio M3 Max or M4 Max due to better thermal management running at such high settings. So how does frame generation perform on M3 Max on my 14-inch model? I'm especially interested in this because I want to see if it allows for gameplay at 60 plus FPS when the machine starts to throttle. It really does help on this machine, particularly when used alongside metal effects, delivering extremely high frame rates. Frame generation is awesome, but it definitely introduces some visual artifacts in exchange for better performance. I now want to take a look at the native version compared to the crossover version, and this is where things get really interesting. On the Max chips, what I'm finding is the difference between the native and the crossover version is staggering. So this is 1080p high, and we are seeing an average FPS of 68.43 in the native version and 49.06 in the crossover version. When playing actual gameplay, you can see how much better it is. There is so much shader compilation going on in the crossover version, which is obviously impacting the performance. But it's very interesting to see that on this M3 Max chip compared to like M4 and M4 Pro, the difference in the native and the crossover version is so much different. Like the native version is so much better, and obviously that is what we want to see. That is awesome. That's really good, and it leads me to believing that this game is pretty well optimized for the native version of Cyberpunk. And obviously I don't think this Mac is like a good representation of performance due to it throttling, but this still gives us an understanding of that Apple and CD Projekt Red, in my opinion, have done really well here. Okay, so our last Mac that I'm going to be taking a look at is my M1 Max machine. This machine is a few years old now, but it's still going hard. This machine does not have support for ray tracing, so do keep that in mind. But let's take a look. So first, let's take a look at the For This Mac preset, which targets a mix of medium and high settings respectively, and 60 FPS. And what we are getting is a nice 60 FPS on average. It doesn't actually provide you a lock 60 FPS. In some scenes, yes it is. In other scenes, it can drop below the target of 60 and then it can drop back up. It's actually, yeah, it's not lock 60, but it's still pretty good. Obviously the game is being upscaled from an incredibly low resolution. I also do want to point out that metal effects does not work right now in macOS Toha on this Mac, so I am using AMD FSR 3 dynamic resolution scaling. I know some will be like, oh, you're running the game at 1080p medium for 60 FPS, but I think this is actually still pretty good for a machine that was released in 2021. I didn't look at the game too much on this machine, but this is 1080p medium, and we are seeing an average FPS of 50.38. The game does obviously look considerably better like this, but we are not pushing for 60 FPS. But I think there is a lot of breathing room to work with here. You can change the settings considerably to get a higher FPS. Now, I also did a comparison between the native version and the crossover version. And even on M1 Max, the difference is still pretty staggering. So this is 1080p medium, and the native version we're getting 50, and then in the crossover version we're getting 36.55. Now I ran this benchmark a few times and it was always about the same, but that is just that's awesome. Like that's such a massive difference. And obviously there's a lot of shader compilation going on, and it's considerably less in the native version. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with the native port here and so forth. I'm not putting down what Codeweavers have done with the crossover version. It's running through layers of translation, and in order to get this game running, I still think what they've done is absolutely amazing. But this is just a really good showcase of how much better the native version can be. Okay, guys, and that was Cyberpunk performance across a range of Macs. I think this port is pretty good. Like, I think it's actually really good, and I'm really happy about that. I was quite nervous that it would be a letdown, but it's not. And it's really good to see that Apple have put so much effort into this. CD Projekt Red have put so much effort into this, not just in terms of the optimization, but in terms of the marketing as well. I think it's really cool to see that as well, that Apple are somewhat pushing for it. And CD Projekt Red have, advertised this game and so forth. And that's really, really exciting. Like, I'm seeing news outlets talking about a Mac game that I never really hear from. Like, and I think that's really, really cool. And I'm hoping that this encourages more developers to bring their AAA games to Mac, because Mac gaming, it sucks. It's not very good, but we've got all the tools there, that we've got everything ready now. Like, it's just up to Apple pushing us, showing that we want games, and developers knowing that there is an audience here. And also CD Projekt Red, I don't think there's any reason why you can't bring The Witcher 3 to Mac. Like, bring it. What are you doing? Just port it. Come on.